This next area of personality is focused on how you make decisions. Some individuals have a preference for thinking, while others have a preference for feeling. And again, remember that the typical use of these words differs from their use in the MBTI interpretation. In the MBTI, just because you have a preference for thinking doesn't mean that you don't have any feelings. And if you have a preference for feeling, it doesn't mean that you don't think and analyze things. In the MBTI, these words refer to whether you use thinking or feeling at the moment of decision making. It's a bit like, does your head rule your heart, or does your heart rule your head? Thinking is about being directed by objective logic. It's the cause and effect thinking, and people with a preference for thinking are very quick to see flaws in logic. They are keen to critique something that is wrong or doesn't fit accurately. When dealing with people, they like to apply consistent principles. Everyone is treated fairly. Everyone is treated the same. And at work, people with a preference for thinking emphasize their involvement with tasks, their output, their results. On the other side, people with a preference for feeling, they apply individual values. Feeling is focused on decision-making based on values rather than logic. People with a preference for feeling are guided by their personal values. They focus on harmony with others, and they look for common ground. They choose to treat each person as a unique individual, so it's not one rule fits all. It's you are a unique person, therefore how should I treat you? And at work, rather than focus on the task, they emphasize the people side of things. Here is a cartoon that highlights some of the key differences. You have two salesmen. The salesman on the right has a preference for feeling, and he's asking questions including, how's the baby? How's your mother doing? How did you feel about yesterday's meeting? He's trying to connect with his customers. He's trying to empathize with their situation and create commonality and connections. The salesman on the left is simply saying, let's cut the small talk. Let's get on with it. They have an emphasis on thinking. They bypass all the attempts to connect, and they focus on the task at hand. They go straight to the objective of the sale. Keep in mind that what we're looking at is the way that we make decisions. On the one side, you have thinking, so people with a preference for thinking are going to value logic, and they're going to be very analytical. On the other side, we have feeling. So people with a preference toward feeling are going to value their personal beliefs and their values. So let's go back to the thinking side and provide an overview. So folks with a preference for thinking are going to apply logical reasoning. They're going to seek the objective truth. They're going to look for numbers and facts and details, things that they can use to definitively answer a question. They're going to decide using impersonal criteria. They're not going to look at their friendships, their relationships. They're going to look at the hard facts, the numbers, the results, things that are impersonal. They're going to focus on tasks. They're going to solve problems with logic. People with a preference for thinking can sometimes be considered and viewed as tough-minded. And they feel that they are fair because they want everyone to be treated equally, regardless of relationships or friendships or gender or age. People with a preference toward thinking are going to be objective, use impersonal criteria, and treat everyone equally. Let's go to the other side for the preference for feeling. They're going to prefer things that can be empathetic. They're going to be guided by personal values. How do they feel about things? They're going to assess the impacts of a decision on people. Well, if we restructure, for example, what does that mean for the people that work for us, and how is that going to impact them and their families? They strive for harmony and positive interactions. They really value that. They are often viewed as compassionate. And they would also be considered fair, but for a different reason. They consider it to be fair when they treat everyone as an individual, because everyone has their individual backgrounds and their individual tendencies. Let's further analyze how this could be applied. Think about your own life. How do you go about making decisions? Do you step out of the situation to decide objectively using impersonal criteria? Or do you attempt to step into the situation, to empathize with people, and take into account personal circumstances? So let's look at a scenario that may help you determine which preference connects best with you. So here's the scenario. Because of restructuring, your company is forced to lay off one employee from the marketing department. The choice has come down to one of two people. Ted, a 57-year-old with 22 years at the company, or Alan, 30 years old, who joined the firm 2 years ago. Both Ted and Alan have similar job descriptions. Let me tell you a little bit more about Ted. Ted is 57 years old. He's married. He has one son in college and another starting in the fall. He is a good, loyal employee. After all, he spent 22 years at the company, and he consistently does good work. Ted has a yearly salary of $100,000. Let's take a look at Alan. For Alan, a bachelor who's 30 years old, it's widely considered that his best years are ahead of him. He is senior management material. He consistently turns in excellent work and brings more revenue into the company than Ted. Alan has a yearly salary of $70,000. So the question is, who would you lay off and why? Think about that one for a second. Look back at the scenario. Consider Ted, 57, loyal employee. Look at his salary. And then consider Alan, younger, a real positive upside. His best years ahead of him. He brings in more revenue and has a smaller yearly salary. So who would you lay off and why? The people with a preference for thinking would focus on the facts, the numbers, and the bottom line. They would state that Ted costs more, perhaps has less years left in the company, and brings in less revenue. Any friendship and personal circumstance aside, this is a business decision, and Ted, the 57-year-old, would likely be laid off. The person with a preference for feeling would empathize with Ted's personal situation. He has 2 kids. He's dedicated 22 years to the firm, which demonstrates their loyalty to you and to the company. While this person with a preference toward feeling isn't blind to the financial circumstances, they will likely base their decision on their values, the relationships that have been created, and their desire for harmony. Each preference type has its own strengths and weaknesses. Think about how you typically make decisions. Are you consistently using one style over another? Refer back to page 3 of your MBTI to review the clarity scale. Is your scored result slight, moderate, clear, or very clear? Knowing both the content of the MBTI assessment and your own personal situation, what would you consider your best fit preference between thinking and feeling?